picture a palace. No, really, a proper palace. Something you'd see on a postcard or in one of those illustrated magazines that sit in the waiting rooms of respectable doctors and respectable solicitors and respectable men with respectable opinions about what is and isn't proper behaviour for a woman in the year 1853. It has a grand Italianate facade stretching nearly a third of a mile from one end to the other. That's longer than some village high streets. Longer than the main shopping boulevard in cities most people in England will never visit. It has 2 enormous wings, each one fanning out from a central block like arms open wide in welcome. It has ornamental towers, decorative stonework, a long curving driveway lined with trees that in spring drop white blossoms onto the gravel like confetti at a wedding. From the road, on a clear morning, with the light hitting the pale facade just right, it looks like a country seat. The home of a duke, maybe, or a very successful industrialist who wants the neighbours to know it. The kind of place that appears in serialised novels as the destination of a governess arriving by carriage, nervous and hopeful, and full of dreams about what comes next. Now fill it with over 1,000 people who didn't choose to be there. Add the smell of 200 unwashed bodies to every corridor. Add the sound of someone weeping behind a locked door, and the sound of someone laughing at nothing in particular, and the sound of shoes on stone floors, and the clang of iron keys, and the low, endless murmur of a building that is never, ever fully quiet. Add the cold. Not the pleasant cold of a country house with draughty windows and a fireplace someone forgot to light. The deliberate cold of a place where warmth is considered a luxury, and luxury is considered a medical problem. A place where the windows are barred, not to keep the weather out, but to keep you in. Add the locked doors, the counted cutlery, the 2 attendants who walk the ward at night and check on you every quarter hour, not because they are concerned about your health, but because they need to confirm you haven't done something the paperwork would make difficult. That's Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum, opened in 1851, 2 years before our story begins, the largest asylum in England, the most modern, the most progressive. A triumph of Victorian institutional architecture and Victorian institutional thinking, both of which were, in their own way, magnificent and completely wrong. We're going back there tonight. Not as visitors on a charitable tour, nodding sympathetically at the patients and making mental notes to mention the experience at dinner. Not as the physicians who walk briskly through the wards with their notebooks and their certainties. Not as the trustees who inspected the premises in 1852 and declared the ventilation admirable. We're living it. One admission, one person. Everything she would have seen, smelled, heard and endured. So, I make these history stories and I genuinely have no idea if you're listening to this in a warm bed, peacefully drifting off, or if you're one of those people who seeks out stories about Victorian medical horror, specifically when you can't sleep, which is its own special kind of irony. Either way, subscribe if you want, get comfortable, here we go. Your name is Eleanor Marsh. You're 24 years old. You're not mad. This is the most important thing. This is the fact you will repeat to yourself every morning when the bell rings at 6 o'clock and pulls you out of whatever thin, shallow sleep you manage to find on a mattress stuffed with straw that smells of the previous occupant and possibly the one before that. This is what you will say to yourself while you stand in line for the basin and try to wash your face in water that is cold and brown and shared with 11 other women. This is the ground beneath your feet. The thing you come back to when everything else starts to dissolve. I am not mad. I was sad. There is a difference. But in the year 1853 in England, the difference is not always as large as it should be. Your eyes open to darkness. For a moment, half a second, maybe less, you've forgotten where you are. There's that brief, merciful gap between sleep and consciousness where you're nowhere, no one, nothing but a warm shape beneath a rough blanket, where the smell hasn't hit you yet and the sounds are just sounds and nothing means anything. Then it hits you. The smell comes first. It is not a single smell. It is layers, like the geological strata a lecturer might describe in a scientific talk, pressing down one on top of another over centuries of accumulated use. There is the smell of the chamber pots. 14 women sleep in this dormitory room, and the chamber pots are collected in the morning, which means they sit through the night at the end of each bed, waiting, accumulating evidence of their purpose. Yours is 3 feet from your face. There is the smell of the tallow candle they burned last night before the attendant snuffed it at 8 o'clock. When lights out is lights out, no discussion, no request. No matter that it was still technically evening and you hadn't finished the letter you were composing in your head to your sister. The candle smell is cheap and faintly nauseating, like fat gone wrong. There is the smell of the woman in the next bed, whose name is Agnes, who is perhaps 50 years old and who has been here for 11 years and has stopped noticing certain things about herself that other people do notice. You've been here 3 weeks. You still notice. There is the smell of the floor. Stone flags swept each morning by the patients themselves. This is called moral therapy, you'll learn, but swept imperfectly, and the cracks between the stones hold things that sweeping doesn't reach. Things that have been there for years. Things you try not to think about. And underneath all of it, underneath the bodies and the tallow and the damp stone and the metal tang of the locked window latch, there is something older, deeper, the institutional smell, the smell of a building that has housed human suffering in an organised and regulated manner for long enough that the suffering has soaked into the plaster itself. Welcome to Colney Hatch. The date is the 14th of March, 1853. You've been here 22 days. The bell rings at 6 o'clock. Not a gentle bell. Not the kind that might ease you from sleep with its soft musical tone. This bell is mounted in the corridor outside the dormitory door, operated by an attendant named Mrs. Briggs, who has been doing this for 9 years and has not once in 9 years considered ringing it gently. It is a large bell with a cast iron clapper and a sound that doesn't invite you to wake up so much as it demands an explanation for why you were asleep in the first place. You sit up. The dormitory is grey. One window, high on the wall, barred, always barred. Lets in the early morning light, which at this hour is barely light at all, but more of a lightening, an easing of the darkness into something merely dim. 13 other shapes are stirring in 13 other beds, some slowly, some all at once, jerked to attention by the bell-like soldiers. One woman in the far corner does not move at all, and you feel the familiar cold wash of anxiety. But then she rolls over and you see her breathing, and the anxiety releases, leaves you hollow. You swing your legs over the side of the bed. The stone floor is cold. This is perhaps the most constant sensory fact of your life here. The cold of the stone floor against your bare feet every single morning, reaching through the soles of your feet and up into your ankles and the bones of your shins, a cold that says, you are here, you are awake. There is no softness in this particular morning. Your stockings are where you left them, folded on the floor beside the bed. This is what passes for privacy here. The 6-inch radius around your bed where your things are allowed to exist without someone moving them or taking them or declaring them a risk to your mental health. You put on your stockings sitting on the edge of the mattress. The straw inside shifts under your weight, whispering dryly. You put on your dress, grey wool, provided by the institution, because your own clothes were taken on admission and are being held somewhere in some storeroom, waiting for the day you're declared recovered and sent home. The dress is too large across the shoulders and too short at the ankle and rough against the skin in a way that never quite becomes normal, no matter how many mornings you put it on. You button it up with fingers that are stiff from the cold. The buttons are small and bone and slightly mismatched, because this dress was patched together from parts of other dresses, and someone didn't bother ensuring consistency. Third button from the top catches. It always catches. You work it loose, then push it through. Agnes is already up, standing by the window looking at the bar of grey sky visible above the sill. She does this every morning, just stands there, looking at the sky. You have never asked her why, because you are afraid she might tell you, and you are afraid of what the answer might be, and you are afraid that you understand it already and don't need to hear it spoken out loud. The dormitory door opens. Mrs. Briggs comes in, solid and purposeful, her ring of keys clinking at her waist with every step. She's not unkind. That's the thing you keep coming back to. She's not unkind. She's simply precise in her execution of a system she did not design and has never questioned, and the effect of this precision is something that lands very close to unkindness from where you're standing, even if the intention was never that. Morning routine, she says. Not good morning, just morning routine, as if the goodness of the morning is an open question she's not prepared to settle either way. The 14 women of Ward 7 move toward the washroom. The washroom is a narrow room off the main dormitory. 2 basins shared between 14 women. The water comes from a pump in the corner. Cold water, always cold. The institution has a boiler system. You've heard the attendants mention it. But the hot water is allocated to the baths on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the kitchen and the laundry. And somewhere in the hierarchy of distribution, Ward 7's morning wash comes after all of that, which is to say it doesn't come at all. You wait your turn. There are 5 women ahead of you. The woman at the first basin, her name is Mary. She arrived 2 weeks after you. She cries at night in a way that is completely silent and completely heartbreaking. Just the shape of crying without any sound. Splashes water on her face 3 times, pats it with a communal towel, steps aside. The towel is damp by the time you reach it. You wash quickly. The water raises goosebumps on your forearms. Your face tightens with the cold in a way that's almost painful, your skin contracting all at once like something closing. You look at yourself briefly in the small mirror above the basin, tin-backed, scratched, the reflection wavery and unreliable, which on some mornings you're grateful for, and you see yourself, pale, thinner than you were, the shadows under your eyes a shade deeper than they were 3 weeks ago. You look, you sometimes think, like exactly what they think you are. This is one of the cruelties of the place. It has a way of producing evidence for its own diagnosis. Breakfast is at 7. You walk to the dining hall in a line because everything here is done in a line. The walk from Ward 7 to the dining hall takes approximately 4 minutes and passes 2 locked doors, one of which requires Mrs. Briggs to use the large key, and the other of which inexplicably she opens with a smaller key, a detail you've been watching closely because you have been watching everything closely, because watching closely is one of the few things you've retained that is entirely your own. The dining hall is large, long tables, benches on either side, no backs to the benches, which means you can't lean, and which means that every meal here is something you sit up straight for whether or not you want to, as if the furniture itself is enforcing good posture. There are perhaps 60 women eating breakfast now. More arrive as you find your seat. The room fills with the sounds of bowls being placed on tables and spoons scraping, and the low, formless murmur of 60 women who have been told, repeatedly, that loud conversations are discouraged. Breakfast today is porridge. It is always porridge. You've asked once if there was variation, bread perhaps, or something other than grey paste in a bowl, and the attendant who answered looked at you with an expression that suggested the question itself was a kind of symptom. The dietary has been approved by the medical superintendent, she said, and that was the end of that. The porridge is unsalted. This is not an oversight. Salt is considered, by some Victorian medical thinking, to have stimulating properties, and stimulation is not what the asylum is about. The asylum is about the opposite of stimulation. The asylum is about calm, enforced and categorical. You eat it anyway, because you've learned 3 weeks is long enough to learn this. That not eating here does not read as grief or protest, or a reasonable response to porridge of this particular quality. Not eating here reads as a deterioration in your condition, which means more observation, which means less freedom, which means less chance of going home. So you eat the porridge, it sits in your stomach like wet clay. This is what I need you to understand before we go any further. You did not come here because you were mad. I know that sounds like something everyone locked away in a Victorian asylum would say. I know that I'm not mad, I'm perfectly sane, this is all a terrible mistake, is the kind of statement we've been trained by a century of stories to regard with some skepticism. Yes, of course you'd say that. That's what a mad woman would say. But here's the thing. Here's the thing that makes Victorian psychiatric history one of the most genuinely unsettling subjects I've ever spent time reading about. In 1853, the criteria for certifying someone as a lunatic requiring institutional care were, to put it charitably, flexible. The Lunacy Act of 1845, only 8 years before our story, had actually been intended as a reform. It required that every county in England and Wales build a properly regulated asylum. It required that patients be admitted only with a certificate signed by a magistrate or a clergyman and a doctor. 2 signatures, a safeguard. But here's what those signatures actually required. The magistrate, who was usually also a local landowner, a JP, a man with his own concerns and his own definition of normal behaviour in women, needed to be satisfied that the person was of unsound mind. The doctor needed to certify the same, and the medical understanding of unsound mind in 1853 included, depending on which alienist you consulted and which textbook he'd read most recently, the following conditions: excessive grief, refusal to eat, persistent crying, refusal to leave the house, delusion, which could mean anything from hearing voices to believing incorrectly that your brother-in-law had stolen your dead husband's savings, which in your case was not a delusion but an accurate observation that nobody wanted to hear. There were women in English asylums in the 1850s who were there because they were inconvenient. There were women there because their families couldn't manage them, or didn't want to, or had decided that the particular way they expressed grief was incompatible with a respectable household. There were women there who'd been committed by husbands, brothers, fathers and sons, because in England in 1853 a married woman had no legal standing independent of her husband. She couldn't own property. She couldn't sign contracts. She couldn't, in a very real practical sense, refuse to be placed in an institution if her husband and a doctor agreed it was warranted. You're a widow. Your husband is dead. That particular mechanism doesn't apply to you. But your brother-in-law had power of attorney over your late husband's estate, and your brother-in-law found your presence in the house, the crying, the not eating, the sitting in your late husband's chair and refusing to be moved from it, incompatible with his plans for the house and the estate. And he knew a doctor, and the doctor knew a magistrate, and here you are, eating grey porridge in a dining hall that smells of 60 women and wet wool in the most modern lunatic asylum in England, 22 days in. The morning routine at Colney Hatch in 1853 is built on a philosophy called moral management. This was an actual thing, a real and genuinely well-intentioned development in the treatment of the mentally ill, first articulated by a Quaker reformer named William Tuke at the York Retreat in 1796, later developed by a series of physicians who believed that the old ways, the chains, the beatings, the deliberate cruelty of institutions like Old Bethlehem, where the public used to pay a penny to come and stare at the inmates on Sunday afternoons, these old ways were barbaric, unscientific, and counterproductive. Moral management said, treat the mad with kindness, give them structure, give them work, give them exercise, give them occupation. Don't chain them to the wall, don't beat them, engage them, and through this engagement, restore them to reason. It was for its time a genuine improvement. And like most improvements, it carried within it a set of assumptions that nobody examined carefully enough. The assumption that structure itself is healing, the assumption that work is medicine, the assumption that cheerfulness, exhibited, performed, maintained, is a sign of health, and that its absence is a symptom of disease. The assumption that the correct response to grief is to be managed out of it as quickly and efficiently as possible, like a blocked drain cleared by a competent plumber. The assumption that the people doing the managing know better than the people being managed what constitutes a healthy mind. This is the institution you live in now. After breakfast, the morning work assignments begin. Work in Colney Hatch is allocated by ward and by the opinion of the attendants regarding your capabilities. Ward 7 is one of the middle wards, not the acute ward, which houses the most recently admitted and the most severely disturbed, and not the convalescent ward, which houses the women deemed nearly recovered and preparing for discharge. Middle ward, the long-stay ward. The ward full of women who have been here long enough that the institution has stopped thinking of them as temporary. You refuse to think of yourself as long stay. You refuse this the way you refuse the grey dress and the porridge, with a private internal stubbornness that nobody can see and nobody can take away. Today your assignment is the laundry. The laundry is in the basement of the west wing. You walk there in a line again, down 2 flights of stone stairs, the cold increasing with each step as you descend. The laundry room itself is large, perhaps 40 feet square, with 6 enormous copper vats set into the floor, each one sitting above a fire pit that is already burning by the time you arrive. The steam rises from the vats in dense white columns. The room is simultaneously the warmest place in the building the heat from the fires and the boiling water turning the air thick and wet, and the place that requires the most physical labour of anything you've been asked to do. You find this almost funny, in a way that doesn't reach your face. The rest of the building freezes you. The laundry boils you. There is no moderate temperature available in 1853 Colney Hatch. That would be too much to ask. Your station is the second vat from the left. The woman working beside you is called Ruth. Ruth is 31, gap-toothed, with forearms that have clearly been doing this work long enough to become very good at it. She was a domestic servant before she came here. She had what her admissions form called religious mania, which in practice meant she had begun to feel, very strongly, that God was speaking to her directly and had a specific plan for her, which her employer felt was incompatible with the duties of a scullery maid. Ruth has been at Colney Hatch for 3 years. She is, by any measure you could apply, entirely sane, practical, organised, efficient at the laundry in a way that suggests the laundry would struggle without her. She's developed, over 3 years, a comprehensive mental map of the institution, which attendants will allow a small liberty if asked correctly, which will not, which doors are locked at which hours, which doctors are worth appealing to, and which ones will note your appeal in your case file as evidence of continued agitation. Ruth is, in short, exactly the kind of person you want on your side. "You're holding it wrong," she says, nodding at the long wooden paddle you're using to stir the linens in the vat. You look down at your hands. Your grip looks fine to you. "Wrist loose," Ruth says, "not stiff. You'll be in agony by noon if you grip it like that. Think of it like stirring soup, not fighting it." You loosen your grip. The paddle moves differently, easier. "Thank you," you say. Ruth shrugs. Back to her own vat. The linens in your vat are sheets, dozens of them, wound together in the boiling water, heavy with wet. The paddle is thick, hardwood, maybe 5 feet long, dark with years of use, the end worn smooth and slightly dished from thousands of hours of stirring. When you push it through the water, resistance pushes back. Not violently. This isn't like rowing a boat through rough water, but constantly, persistently, the way the laundry insists on its own weight even when you'd rather pretend it doesn't have any. The steam comes off the surface in waves. It hits your face and your neck and the inside of your forearms where your sleeves are pushed up, and it is not unpleasant at first. Warm and damp after the cold of the corridor, but by the end of the first hour it has settled into a different quality. Sticky, heavy. Your hair, which you pinned up this morning in the dim dormitory, is beginning to come loose at the temples, small dark strands plastered to your skin with moisture. Your dress is darkening at the back with sweat. The sound in the laundry room is constant and particular, the low roaring of the fires beneath the vats, the bubbling, heaving sound of water at a rolling boil, which is not quite the same as water simmering. It is a busier, more turbulent sound, full of small collapses and resurfaces, the wet slap of linens against the side of the copper when the paddle pushes them there, the scrape of the wooden paddles themselves, occasionally catching the bottom of the vats with the sound that sets your teeth very slightly on edge. And underneath all of this, the sounds of 18 women working, breathing, the occasional quiet word, no singing, which in a different context, a domestic laundry, a workhouse, a navy ship, there might have been. Singing is not encouraged on the wards. Singing apparently can be a symptom. You find this, not for the first time, nearly inconceivable. You were raised in a house where your mother sang in the kitchen every morning, where singing was as natural as breathing and twice as essential. The idea that a sound produced by a human throat, a sound of nothing more threatening than voice-meeting melody, could be classified as evidence of disorder. This continues 3 weeks in to catch you off guard, to produce in you a small, precise fury that you cannot express because expressing it will also be noted in your file. You stir the linens, you do not sing. The sheet comes out of the vat at 9:30, when the fire underneath it is reduced and the water cools enough to be worked with hands rather than only with the paddle. Ruth shows you the wringing technique, working in pairs, each woman taking an end of the sheet and twisting in opposite directions, the water running out in streams onto the stone floor and away through the drainage channel cut into the flags. Your arms ache with the wringing. The wet linen is heavier than you expect, much heavier. A single double sheet, waterlogged, weighs more than you'd estimate by roughly double, and you estimate wrong every time for the first 2 weeks, committing your weight to a pull that turns out to require more of you than you gave it. By the end of the wringing, your hands are red, not sore exactly, not yet, but that deep tissue flush of overworked muscle, the kind that will be sore tomorrow and the day after and will not entirely resolve because tomorrow you'll be back here doing this again. The sheets go to the mangling table. This is a heavy iron device with rollers, operated by a wheel on the side, and it presses the last of the water from the linen as it passes through. The sound it makes is a deep, regular grinding, like a very large mill, and you feel it in your chest as much as you hear it with your ears. One woman feeds the sheet in, another guides it through, another catches it on the other side, folding it roughly as it emerges, still warm, into a pile. You are the feeder this morning. The trick is to keep it even, Ruth explains. If the sheet goes in crooked, it comes out creased in ways that will require ironing later, and you will be the one doing the ironing because the work goes around in a circle of accountability that this particular institution has perfected. Feed it straight, guide it straight, catch it straight. You feed it straight. By the time the laundry session ends at 11, you have processed, between you and your partner at the vat, approximately 42 sheets, 27 pillowcases, and a quantity of towels you've lost count of. 42 sheets, 27 pillowcases. For the patients and the staff and the medical rooms and the dining hall and the receiving room where new patients arrive. You wring out each one of these sheets with your own hands, in cold water that smells of lye soap and other things underneath the lye, and you stack them in piles, and at the end of the morning an attendant counts the piles and makes a note in a book. You are not paid for this. Moral therapy, remember. The work is the treatment. I need you to understand something about the way time moves inside an institution like this. In the outside world, your outside world, which you can still remember with the sharpness of something you haven't quite lost yet, time has variation. There are days that stretch and days that compress. There are mornings that feel like they're over before they begin, and afternoons that lengthen into something like eternity in a pleasurable way, sitting in a garden or reading by a window, or simply existing in the particular loose-jointed way of a person who has nowhere specific to be. Time, on the outside, has texture, peaks and troughs, surprise. Inside Colney Hatch, time is flat. This is not a metaphor. This is not a philosophical observation about the nature of institutional life. This is a sensory fact that you notice in your body before you understand it in your mind. Every day has the same shape. Bell at 6, wash, porridge, work, dinner at 1, exercise yard, afternoon work or instruction, supper, evening, lights, out at 8. And then the long dark of the night, which is when time does something strange. It both stretches and disappears at once, the night seeming simultaneously endless while you lie awake and then somehow gone when you open your eyes, and it is 6 o'clock again and nothing has changed. This flatness is part of the treatment, in the thinking of Colney Hatch and every asylum like it. Regularity, predictability. The nervous system soothed by repetition, given nothing to react to, given no surprises that might provoke an episode. For some patients, genuinely disturbed patients in the grip of conditions that 19th century medicine doesn't yet have the tools to understand, let alone treat, this regularity is genuinely helpful. The rhythm is a kind of container, something to hold on to. For you, it is something else. For you, it is the removal of every element that makes time worth living in. Every morning the same, every meal the same, every afternoon the same. The days cease to be days and become a single day, repeated. And in the repetition, something happens to your sense of your own continuity. The thread that connects yesterday, Eleanor to today, Eleanor to the Eleanor you were before all this, begins to thin. You notice this happening and you find it terrifying, and you cannot say so, because saying so will be noted in your file as evidence of deterioration. So instead, every day, you count. You count the days since admission, today is 22, and you count the flagstones in the corridor between the dormitory and the dining hall, 47, and you count the buttons on Mrs. Briggs's uniform, 12, and you count the bars on the dormitory window, 5 vertical, 3 horizontal, making 15 intersections if you include the corners. You count because counting is a way of marking time that nobody can take from you, and because the number is evidence. There was a yesterday, and there was a day before that, and the fact that today is 22 means that there will be a 23, and eventually there will be a number high enough to represent whatever it takes to be declared recovered. And on that day, you will leave. You do not know what that number is. You do not know if there is a number at all. This is the worst thing, not the porridge and not the cold and not the rough dress and not the laundry. The worst thing is not knowing the condition that would be sufficient for discharge, because nobody will tell you, because you are not in the position of being told things here. You are in the position of being observed and recorded and managed. You are a file. Case number 8. 47. Female. Age 24. Admitted February 20th, 1853. Diagnosis: melancholia with refusal of food and social withdrawal following the death of husband. Prognosis: uncertain. The doctors come on Wednesdays. Dr. Hargreaves, the medical superintendent, does his round every Wednesday morning with 2 junior physicians and an attendant who carries the case files. The round is a formal affair. The doctors walk the ward, the patients are presented, observations are made, notes are taken. This is your examination. It is also something you have spent a significant portion of your mental energy preparing for and dreading in roughly equal measure. The Wednesday round begins at 10 o'clock, which means it arrives in the middle of the morning work session, which means you are extracted from whatever task you've been assigned and brought to a small room off the main corridor, where a chair faces a table, and behind the table is a doctor. Today you are brought out of the laundry. You're still damp from the steam, your hair loosened, your hands raw from the wringing. You sit in the chair and try to appear as someone who is recovering, which in this context means appearing calm and acquiescent and grateful, none of which you are. Dr. Hargreaves is perhaps 55. He is not a cruel man. He has, in fact, written pamphlets that are considered progressive in their advocacy for humane treatment of the mentally ill. He has a rectangular face and a beard trimmed to precise uniformity, and a way of looking at you that is professional and not unkind, and somehow entirely missing, at the same time, the fact that you are a person with an interior and not merely a set of symptoms to be catalogued. Mrs. Marsh, he says. Dr. Hargreaves. He opens the file, reads something, closes it. How are you sleeping? Adequately, you say, because well would be a lie and badly would be a symptom. Eating? Yes. He looks at you for a moment. You seem less withdrawn than on previous Wednesdays. You don't know how to answer this without it becoming evidence. If you say yes, you're improving, it sounds like you're performing improvement for the audience. If you say you're not sure, it sounds like you lack insight into your own condition, which is itself considered a symptom. If you say the question is poorly framed, which it is, you'll be noted as agitated. I've been trying to engage with the work, you say. This is the correct thing to say. You can see it in the slight relaxation of his expression. Good. And the other patients? Any incidents? Incidents. He means outbursts, disturbances. No, you say. Any unusual thoughts? And here it is. The question under all the questions. Do you believe things that are not true? Are you experiencing phenomena that others are not experiencing? Is your reality diverging from the agreed-upon version in ways that concern us? No unusual thoughts, you say. He writes something down. You watch his pen move across the paper, and you want, very badly, to ask him what he's writing. You want to ask him what it would take, specifically, precisely, with dates if possible, for him to sign your discharge papers. You want to ask him on what grounds a person's brother-in-law has the authority to place them here and what legal mechanisms exist to challenge that authority, and whether he, as a physician, has any obligation beyond the word of the admitting doctor and the countersigning magistrate. You don't ask any of this. You learned in the first week what happens when you ask these questions. Week 1, you asked them. You ask clearly and reasonably, in the tone of a woman who'd been educated, who had read widely, who had opinions and the vocabulary to express them. And the following Wednesday the file had a note. Patient displays preoccupation with the circumstances of her admission. Argumentative when questioned about her condition. Some insight lacking. Argumentative. You have thought a great deal about that word since. I think we can consider reducing your level of observation, Dr. Hargreaves says now. You'll still be on the general ward, but Mrs. Briggs will note your sleeping schedule every other night rather than every night. This is something, a small something, less surveillance, 1 night in 2 where you're not checked at 15-minute intervals, which means 1 night in 2 where you might sleep long enough to dream something. Thank you, you say. He nods, makes another note. The attendant collects the file. The doctor stands. Continue with the work programme, he says. It seems to be helping. He leaves. You sit for a moment in the chair after he's gone. Continue with the work programme. You squeeze your raw red hands together in your lap once, very hard, and then release them. Then you stand up and go back to the laundry. Dinner is at 1 o'clock. The dining hall again. The same benches, the same tables, the same 60 women. The meal today is mutton stew, which is an improvement over Thursday's boiled potato with no discernible accompanying anything, and the smell of it, carried from the kitchen in great heavy iron pots, is almost enough to feel like something good is about to happen. Almost. The mutton is tough. It has been boiled rather than braised, because braising takes time and attention, and kitchen staff who are not primarily former inmates of the institution, who are considered recovered enough to assist with food preparation under supervision. The vegetables in the stew, turnip, parsnip, onion, are soft to the point of structurelessness, having surrendered to the boiling water everything they once were, and now existing merely as texture and vague flavour impression, rather than food in any meaningful sense. But it is hot, and it fills the hollow in your stomach that the grey porridge left behind. And for the 12 minutes it takes you to eat it, spooning it quickly before it cools and the fat begins to solidify on the surface, you are focused entirely on the physical act of eating, which means you're not thinking about Dr. Hargreaves or the file or the number 22 or the locked doors between you and the main gate. Ruth sits across from you. "He reduce your observation?" she asks, not looking up from her own bowl. "How did you—" "No. You came back from the round without the dead face." The dead face. Everyone gets it. First few months, after the Wednesday round, like something just sat on you. You consider this. He reduced it to every other night. Ruth nods, scoops stew. Next step will be less restricted movement. Airing court on your own schedule rather than the group times. Maybe errand privileges. How long does that take? She thinks about it. For you, maybe 6 weeks, maybe less. You're not. She pauses, choosing the word carefully. You're not a difficult case. You're a sad case which is different, and this place is better at one than the other. Which is it better at? Ruth looks at you directly for the first time in this conversation. Not the second one, she says. The airing court is outside. This is important. The airing court is outside, which in the context of this institution is the nearest thing to normal life that the schedule provides, and you have been looking forward to it. During the laundry session and the dinner and the walk from the dining hall, with a concentration that you know is slightly disproportionate but you can't seem to moderate. It is outside. The airing court is a walled garden attached to Ward 7, approximately 40 feet by 60 feet. Stone walls on all 4 sides, 8 feet high, smooth and uninterrupted. A gravel path around the perimeter. In the centre, a patch of grass, actual green, grown determinedly from the cold soil despite the weather and the institution around it, and 2 wooden benches. No trees. Trees would provide the possibility of climbing. There are no trees. The sky is white with cloud today. March in Hertfordshire means a cold that is wet rather than dry, that finds the gaps in your clothing and settles there rather than blowing through and past. But the air is outside air. It smells of cold earth and distant smoke, and the bare hedges of the estate beyond the wall, and this, after 3 weeks of the laundry and the corridor and the dormitory and the smell of the institution, is nearly enough to undo you. You breathe it in, standing just inside the door for a moment, before the other women spread out across the small space, and you lose the margin of privacy. Just breathe. The cold air fills your lungs. Your chest expands with it. Your ribs push outward against the rough grey wool of the dress, and something, some small clenched thing deep inside your sternum, begins, fractionally, to loosen. Outside. You are outside. Agnes is already on one of the benches. She does this every airing court, claims the bench nearest the east wall, sits, tips her face up at the sky. Even when the sky is cloudy as it is today, even when there's no sun to feel, something in her is reaching toward it anyway. You walk the perimeter. This is your airing court habit, established in the first week. One circuit, measured and deliberate. The gravel crunches under your shoes in a way that's entirely ordinary and therefore entirely wonderful, because outside sounds are sounds from a world where everything is not locked and managed and under observation. 42 steps to the corner, 62 steps along the long wall, 42 back, 62 to your starting point, 146 steps, one circuit. You do 4 circuits this afternoon. On the second circuit, you pass a woman you don't know, from a different ward, you think, brought to the court through the other door, who is standing very still near the grass and looking at it with an expression you can't quite read. She is perhaps 45, with grey in her hair, and the kind of face that under other circumstances you think might be warm, might laugh easily, might be the face of someone's well-loved aunt. She notices you notice in her. They keep it cut very short, she says, nodding at the grass. Yes, you say. I grew up on a farm. Real grass was this tall. She holds her hand, flat at about knee-height. Where was the farm? Somerset, near Taunton. She looks at the grass again. My husband sold it when we married. I didn't want to leave. A pause. Is that why you're here? You ask. It comes out more directly than you intended. She looks at you without offence. No, I'm here because I told my son that the man his father chose for my daughter was dishonest, and I refused to retract it, and I was proven right about the dishonesty, which made my son angry because being right when he was wrong was apparently a medical problem. She says this with a complete flatness, as if reporting the weather. You stare at her. Don't look at me like that, she says, not unkindly. I've had time to get used to it. What about you? Grief, you say. They called it melancholia. She nods, looks back at the grass. This place, she says, treats a lot of things that aren't what it says they are on the form. She walks away toward the bench, and that is the end of that conversation. But you stand at the edge of the gravel and grass for a moment longer, and you look at the cut short grass and the grey sky above the wall, and you feel something clarify inside you that has been murky for weeks. You are not the only one. This is obvious in retrospect. You've been surrounded by women since you arrived. You've eaten with them and worked with them and shared a wash basin with them. But there is a difference between knowing you are not alone and feeling it in your body, as a fact rather than a concept, and the woman from Somerset has just, without trying, possibly without knowing, given you the second kind. You are not the only one who should not be here. You're not the only one who is surviving. Let me tell you about the baths. Tuesday and Thursday, after the morning work session, a selection of patients from Ward 7 are taken to the bathing room. This is technically another element of moral therapy. Cleanliness, order, the external management of the physical self as a route to internal management of the mental self. The bathing room is in a different wing. The walk there is longer than most walks in the institution. You pass through 3 locked doors and down a corridor that borders the male wards, which you know because you can hear, through the thick stone wall, sounds that are clearly human and clearly distressed in ways that institutional life has not yet taught you to be fully comfortable with. You do not know what happens in the male wards. You're not sure you want to. The bathing room has 6 tubs, iron, set into tile. The tiles are dark with age, greenish, slightly filmed with something that the regular scrubbing doesn't quite reach. The tubs are filled from a tap that runs from the boiler, so the water is actually warm, which is the best thing about the bathing room, and you would enjoy it considerably more if the entire process were not conducted by 2 attendants who stand in the room while you undress and wash. because privacy is a luxury, and privacy in a lunatic asylum in 1853 is also considered a potential risk. You undress in a cubicle. The cubicle has a curtain, not a door, and the curtain doesn't quite reach the floor. You've stopped being embarrassed about this in the same way you've stopped being embarrassed about the communal towel. There is a threshold of privacy below which embarrassment stops being a useful response and becomes merely a drain on energy you need for other things. The water is warm. You lower yourself into it. This is the part where the weeks accumulated cold, from the dormitory floor and the stone corridors and the airing court and the laundry steam that warms you superficially, but leaves the deep cold of the place in your bones, begins to lift, just slightly. The warmth of the water against your back and the backs of your thighs and the soles of your feet, which had been cold so consistently since admission that you'd almost forgotten what warm feet felt like. You have 12 minutes in the tub. 12 minutes is not enough, but it is 12 minutes, and you have learned to take the things that are given rather than mourn the things that aren't. Not because you've accepted this place or stopped wanting out of it, but because mourn too long and you lose the 12 minutes in the morning and then you have nothing. The soap is lye soap, the same kind as the laundry. It strips your skin the way the laundry water strips the sheets, aggressively clean, leaving a tight, raw feeling. Your hair, washed every other Tuesday, takes the rest of the bath time and most of a Thursday to dry properly. Afterwards you dress in the same grey wool dress. You feel cleaner. This is the straightforward truth. The cleanliness is real and it matters, regardless of the system that delivers it. You do not feel managed. Now, I want to tell you about the part of the institution that the brochure. There was a brochure, there genuinely was a brochure. The County of Middlesex published illustrated pamphlets about the excellence and humanity of Colney Hatch, and distributed them to people who needed reassuring that their relative was being well cared for. I want to tell you about the part the brochure didn't mention. The brochure mentioned the airing courts. It mentioned the morning work therapy and the afternoon instruction classes, and the library which existed and contained approximately 40 volumes, most of them religious in nature. It mentioned the chapel services on Sunday mornings. It mentioned the medical superintendent's commitment to the principles of moral management. It did not mention the strong room. The strong room is on the first floor of the East Wing. You've never been in it. You don't intend to be in it. But you know about it the way you know about a lot of things in this institution, through the careful accumulation of small observations. A sound heard through a wall, a comment dropped by an attendant who forgot for a moment that patients aren't meant to have context. The strong room is where patients are placed when they become, in the medical vocabulary of the institution, refractory. Refractory means not manageable by the ordinary means. Refractory means refusing to cooperate with the system to a degree that the system finds threatening. This can mean genuine disturbance, a patient in the grip of acute mania, a patient hallucinating and lashing out, a patient in immediate danger to herself or others. In these cases, the strong room serves a function that is at least defensible. It can also mean a patient who asked too many questions about the legality of her admission, a patient who refused to eat the grey porridge on a Tuesday and kept refusing when asked politely, and then less politely, a patient who got hold of a piece of paper and attempted to write to a solicitor. It can mean these things because the category refractory is defined by the institution, and the institution defines it in the ways that are most useful to the institution, and in 1853 there is nobody with both the authority and the will to challenge this. You have been in this institution 22 days, and you have not yet been to the strong room, and you intend very firmly to keep it that way. But on the afternoon of your 22nd day, a Tuesday, coming back from the bathing room, you see something you wish you hadn't seen. You're walking down the corridor on the main floor of Ward 7. 2 attendants are ahead of you, moving quickly, their keys jangling in a way that has a different quality to its usual rhythm, more urgent, less routine. At the far end of the corridor, the door to the dormitory is open, and from inside comes a sound that it takes you a moment to identify. A woman is saying, very clearly and without hysteria, in a voice that is almost conversational, "No, I said no. Please, no." You slow down. You know this voice. It's Mary, the woman who arrived 2 weeks after you. The woman who cries silently at night. The attendants go through the dormitory door. You stop walking entirely. Through the door you can hear the sounds of what is happening, not the details. The door is mostly closed now, pushed to but not latched. But the shape of it, the sounds of struggle that is not quite a struggle, the sounds of someone who's not attacking anyone but is also, as clearly as she's able, not consenting to what is being done to her. And then, quiet. And then Mrs. Briggs comes out, smoothing the front of her dress, and sees you standing in the corridor. Her expression doesn't change. She looks at you the way she looks at the dormitory wall or the locked door, seeing you but not registering you as something that requires a particular response. "Back to your station," she says. You go back to your station. You do not sleep well that night, or the next night, or the night after that. Not from the cold, or the straw mattress, or Agnes in the next bed. Because of the voice. Because of the almost conversational quality of it. Because of the way "no" said by someone sane and aware, and not confused sounds entirely different from "no" said by someone who genuinely cannot comprehend what's happening to them. And you heard the first kind. You're certain you heard the first kind. And it didn't matter. This is the thing about Colney Hatch in 1853 that the brochure absolutely did not mention. The brochure said, humane, progressive. No mechanical restraints, no chains, no physical coercion. The brochure was not precisely lying, but no chains is not the same as no force, and no mechanical restraints allowed for, among other things, the canvas jacket which existed, and the strong room which existed, and the cold bath which also existed and was considered by some physicians a legitimate therapeutic intervention for refractory behaviour. Cold bath. Not the 12-minute warm bath on Tuesdays and Thursdays. A still different bath. Cold. Administered suddenly. Used for patients who were, in the language of the casebook, in a state of excitement. You know about this because Ruth told you. You learn to give them nothing to use, Ruth said, one morning over the laundry vat, her voice low and steady in the steam. No excitement, no argument, no tears in front of the doctors, quiet cooperation. Every time, even when it feels like swallowing glass. Swallowing glass, you'd said. Yes. Ruth's paddle moved through the linens without pausing. You get used to the taste. 5 weeks after your admission, something changes. Not anything dramatic. Not a tribunal or a revelation or a new law passed in Parliament that suddenly providentially establishes the right of sane women to leave institutions they were placed in by interested parties. What changes is smaller than that, and for that reason somehow more real. Dr. Hargreaves on his Wednesday round sits across from you in the little room with the chair and the table, opens your file and says, "I've been reading your admission notes." You wait. The original assessment, he says, was based on a 3-day observation period conducted by the admitting physician. He pauses. 3 days. Yes, you say. Whose practice is in Manchester? Yes. You've been here 5 weeks. 36 days, you say, before you can stop yourself. He looks at you. Something moves briefly in his expression. Not quite surprise. Something between that and a recalibration. The attending notes over the past 4 weeks describe a patient who is, he reads from the file, cooperative, engaged in work therapy, interacting appropriately with fellow patients, showing no evidence of delusion or disordered thought, and demonstrating, and I'm quoting here, considerable and perhaps excessive insight into her situation. He closes the file. Do you know what that last phrase means? That I understand what's happening to me, you say. Yes. And that understanding it is apparently not itself a sign of recovery. He looks at you for a long moment. Mrs. Marsh, he says, I'm going to write to the admitting physician, and I'm going to write to the magistrate who co-signed your admission. Your hands, folded in your lap, grip each other with a pressure that doesn't reach your face. What will you say? I will say that a patient admitted under the category of melancholia with social withdrawal has, over the course of 5 weeks of observation at this institution, shown no evidence that would, in my professional judgment, support a diagnosis of lunacy as defined by the Lunacy Act. The room is very quiet. That does not mean, he adds, that you will be discharged immediately. There is a process. There are forms. Your brother-in-law will need to be consulted. Your stomach drops at this last part. But I am initiating that process, he says, today. He closes the file and stands. You do not cry. You have learned, here, that crying in front of the doctors does not convey what you wish it to convey. Instead you nod once and say, "Thank you, sir." He nods back and leaves. You sit in the chair for a moment after he's gone. 36 days. And this is not freedom yet. This is the beginning of a process. This is a letter written to a man who put you here and who may have things to say about you leaving. This is your future in the hands of a system that decided once and may decide again that what you feel and what you say and who you are adds up to something that requires managing. But it is the beginning. You stand up and go back to the dormitory, and you find the small space around your bed, the 6-inch radius of your own geography in this place, and you sit on the edge of the straw mattress and you press your raw, red hands flat against your thighs, and you breathe in, out. I'm not mad. I know. You learn in your 6th week that there are things you have not yet seen. Ruth has been here 3 years. Ruth has seen the institution through all its seasons. She knows things you don't, and she shares them in the way she shares most things, practically without commentary, the way you'd hand someone useful information rather than making a gift of it. You know the private wing, she says one evening, sitting on her bed, mending a tear in her apron with a needle and thread that the attendants distribute at mending hour. Needles, like everything else, are counted and collected at the end of the session. I've seen the door, you say. The patients there have their own rooms, Ruth says. Single rooms. Their families pay extra. Extra for the rooms, extra for the different food. I know because I've seen the kitchen allocations. An extra for what they call special attention, which mostly means the doctor visits more often and they don't do the laundry. You absorb this. So there's one institution, you say slowly, but 2 experiences of it. More than 2, Ruth says. There's your experience, which is the general pauper ward, I'm not a pauper, you say, reflexively. Ruth looks at you mildly. Your admission was funded by the county, Mrs. Marsh. That's the pauper ward. Whatever you were before, here, you're county funded. The needle pulls thread through cotton with a small regular sound. There's the first-class private ward for families who can pay the full private rate. There's the second-class private for families who can pay most of it. There's the working patients ward, which is where I'll end up if they ever get round to deciding I'm well enough to be moved from Ward 7, but not well enough to leave. The patients who are useful enough to keep around. And there's the refractory ward, which you don't want to think about. I've thought about it, you say. Well, stop, says Ruth. And this is the only time in your acquaintance that she's ever sounded anything like sharp, and it stops you. A pause. The point, Ruth continues, is that the institution is not one thing. It's several things wearing the same building, and which thing it is depends entirely on who you are and who signed the paper, and whether there's money and whose name. And if you're on the wrong level of that, you say, then your recovery looks different, Ruth says, takes longer, or doesn't happen at all. She bites the thread and smooths the mend flat against her palm and sets the apron aside. 3 years, she says. Not to you exactly. To the room, to the evening light coming through the barred window. Do you think you'll leave? You ask. She's quiet for a long time. My family, she says at last. My brother writes sometimes. He doesn't know what to do with me. I'm not dangerous. I'm not mad in any way that frightens people. But I'm also not whoever they thought I was before. She pauses. When you've been in a place like this long enough, you change. Not in the ways they say you change. Not toward recovery or deterioration. You just become a different shape, and that different shape doesn't fit back into the space you came from. You don't know what to say to this. Write to your sister, Ruth says, the one you mentioned, if she'll receive it. I've been told letters are reviewed before they're sent. They are. But the doctor reviewing them is not Mrs. Briggs, and if you write sensibly and don't say anything that'll be noted as agitation, most letters go. She looks at you. Write to your sister. Tell her Dr. Hargreaves is initiating the discharge inquiry. Give her the name. Ask her to follow up. A pause. People on the outside have to pull as hard as you push from in here. You write the letter that night, in the hour before lights out, sitting on the edge of your bed with the candle Mrs. Briggs allows you, because you've been noted as cooperative, with a sheet of paper that is available on request, and a pen that the attendant brings and collects again when you've finished. Dear Catherine, I hope this letter finds you well, and I hope more than I can say that it finds you, meaning that it passes the review here and makes its way to your hands, because I need you to know something important. I am at Colney Hatch Asylum in Hertfordshire. I have been here 39 days. I was placed here by Arthur following Thomas's death, and I want to say clearly and with as much composure as I can manage on paper that I believe this was done for reasons that had less to do with my mental health than with the disposition of Thomas's estate, and the inconvenience my presence represented to Arthur in that matter. The medical superintendent here is Dr. Edward Hargreaves. This week he told me that he is initiating correspondence with the admitting physician and the certifying magistrate with a view to reviewing my detention. He cannot discharge me without the agreement of my legal next of kin, which in the absence of my husband appears to be Arthur, which is a difficulty I would like to resolve. Can you write to Dr. Hargreaves directly? Can you come? I do not know what legal avenue exists, but I am told people on the outside can help from there if people on the inside are working from here, and I am working as hard as I am able. I am well physically. I am doing the laundry on Mondays and Tuesdays and instruction on Wednesday afternoons. I have made one friend. I eat the porridge. I miss you. I miss Thomas. I am still myself, Catherine. I am still here. Your loving sister, Eleanor. You fold the letter and hand it to Mrs. Briggs. She takes it without looking at it. She will read it tomorrow. She will pass it on or she won't. You lie down on the straw mattress and pull the rough blanket up and stare at the ceiling, which is dark, which is the same ceiling you've stared at for 39 nights, 40 tomorrow. And then, because you promised yourself that you would, every night, no matter what, you try to remember Thomas, not the dying, not the 3 days of fever that stripped him down to something unrecognizable, that made his face wrong and his hands strange and his voice a sound you'd never heard before. Not the morning you woke and he was cold beside you. Not the weeks after, the grey weeks that your brother-in-law apparently found so inconvenient. The before. Thomas reading in the evening by the fire, his legs crossed, his brow slightly furrowed in the way it did when he was concentrating and not performing concentration. Thomas laughing. He had a particular laugh, low and genuine, a sound that started in his chest rather than his mouth. Thomas bringing you tea in the morning, slightly too strong, slightly too sweet, exactly the way you'd told him not to make it, and which after the 3rd year of marriage you'd stop trying to correct because his certainty that you'd like it better this way was more endearing than the tea was wrong. The shape of him, this specific, irreplaceable, non-reproducible shape of that particular person, this is what they called melancholia. This is what got you put in here. You miss him with a precision that has not dulled in 39 days, that may not dull in 39 more, and the place where the grief lives in your chest, the hard, dense place, has not resolved into anything else. It has not become acceptance. It has not been managed out of existence by the porridge and the laundry and the Wednesday round. It is just Thomas still, just the absence of him, steady and permanent, and entirely yours. On Wednesday of your 7th week, Dr. Hargreaves tells you he has received a reply from the admitting physician. The admitting physician, a Dr. Welland of Manchester, has stated that his assessment was made in good faith, based on the information presented to him at the time, and that the information was presented by Mr. Arthur Marsh, your brother-in-law, who described a patient who had not eaten in 4 days, had refused to leave the house for 2 weeks, and had accused him, Mr. Marsh, of financial impropriety in the management of his late brother's estate. That last part, you say, the accusation. Dr. Hargreaves looks at you. Was it accurate, you ask? A pause. He is a precise man. He does not want to commit to something he can't document. The Lunacy Act does not require the admitting physician to investigate the financial situation of the family making the referral, he says. I know, you say. I'm asking if you have a view. Another pause. I have a view, he says carefully, that the circumstances of your admission bear further examination. You nod. And the magistrate? The magistrate has referred the matter to his clerk, who has written to say that the magistrate was satisfied at the time of signing that the requirements of the Act were met, which is not the same as saying I should still be here. No, Dr. Hargreaves says, it is not. He opens the file, closes it, opens it again. Your sister, he says, Miss Catherine Whitmore of Leeds. Your chest tightens. She has written to me, he says. You say nothing. She has also written to the Lunacy Commission, he says, the board that oversees the operation of institutions like this one under the terms of the Act. She writes clearly, and with some force, and she has consulted a solicitor. Your throat is very tight. You press your hands flat on your knees. She has requested a personal visit, Dr. Hargreaves says. Under the Act, family members have the right to visit. I have approved the visit for Saturday of this week. Saturday is 4 days away. 4 days. Bring me an ink pen, says Mrs. Briggs at the door, and you realise distantly that you are crying and that this is the first time you have cried since the first morning here, when you cried very quietly into the straw mattress and then stopped and told yourself, not here, not in front of them, not where it will be noted. The first time. You wipe your face with the back of your hand. The skin is rough from the laundry. I'm sorry, you say, though you're not sorry. And Dr. Hargreaves makes a small gesture with his hand that means, please don't apologise for this particular thing. Saturday. Let me tell you what the inside of a Victorian lunatic asylum looks like when you've been in it long enough to stop seeing it, and then, because a reason arrives, you start seeing it again. The main corridor of Ward 7 is approximately 8 feet wide and 60 feet long, flagged in stone with the doors of various rooms, the dormitory, the workroom, the small room with the chair and the table, the storage room, the attendance room, set into the walls at intervals. The walls are whitewashed. They were whitewashed when the building opened in 1851, and in the 2 years since, the whitewash has taken on the complexion of age in an institutional building. Not dirty exactly, but dimmed. Yellowed at the height where the tallow candles are mounted. Scuffed at the height of human shoulders where women have passed for 2 years, back and forth along this corridor in lines and alone, and in the early mornings and the late evenings. There are no pictures on the walls. This is a deliberate choice. Pictures were considered, by some moral management advocates, to have a stimulating effect, and in the acute wards pictures were specifically forbidden. In Ward 7, the absence of pictures has simply persisted, the way institutional practices persist when no one with the authority and the inclination to change them is present at the right moment. The windows are set high in the wall, too high to look out of from a standing position. You'd need to be lifted or to stand on a chair, and the chairs are not for standing on. The function of the windows is ventilation and light, not view. The idea that a patient might want to look out at the world is not something the architecture has accounted for. There is one exception. At the end of the corridor past the last locked door, there is a small landing with a half flight of stairs that leads nowhere now. It used to lead to a wing that was converted to something else. And this landing has a window set at normal height, looking out onto the walled garden of the airing court. Mrs. Briggs sometimes stands at this window in the early mornings, before the bell rings, before her day officially begins. You've seen her there twice, looking at the garden with an expression you can't quite identify. Not wistful. Something more settled than wistful. Something that, on a different face in a different context, might be simply here. You've never been to the landing during the day. It's not on the approved route between any of the spaces you're supposed to occupy, and the fact that it is not locked is one of those small administrative oversights that everyone is aware of and no one mentions. You go there now on a Thursday afternoon with an hour between the laundry and supper while the other women are in the workroom doing the sewing. You stand at the window. Below you, the airing court with its cut short grass and its 2 benches and its gravel path. Empty now. A starling is hopping along the wall, pecking at something in the mortar. The March sky is lighter today than it's been. Not quite blue, but trying to be, the grey thinning towards something almost promising. A line of bare trees is visible above the far wall of the court. Their branches make a pattern against the pale sky, specific and intricate and exactly themselves. And beyond the trees, in the far distance, a smudge of darker cloud, and below it the particular shade of a Hertfordshire hillside in early spring, the brown green of fields about to decide to be green again, this season not quite arrived but very clearly on its way. You press your forehead against the cold glass. Out there, the grass is tall. Out there, your sister Catherine is getting on a train tomorrow. She must be coming. She has written. She's found a solicitor, and the train is carrying her here. Out there, Thomas is buried in the churchyard in Didsbury, and the grave will have a frost on it this morning, and you've not been able to go to him. And this is the thing that cracked you open, in the end, more than anything else. That you could not stand at his grave and feel the cold air and say his name out loud in the open, and let him go as slowly and as badly as you needed to. You couldn't even mourn him in the way you needed to mourn him. They had put you here before you could. The starling finds what it was looking for in the mortar and flies off toward the trees. A clean, direct line, unfenced. You stand at the window until your forehead is cold from the glass and the light is beginning to fade and the bell rings for supper. Then you go back. Saturday. You're awake before the bell. This is not unusual. You're often awake before the bell, lying in the specific silence of a dormitory where everyone is still technically asleep while the building begins to wake. But this morning the being awake has a different quality. Not the low, flat watchfulness of most early mornings. Something more forward-facing. An alertness you haven't felt in weeks. Catherine is coming today. The visiting hour is in the afternoon, 2:00, in a reception room on the ground floor of the main building. Mrs. Briggs will accompany you. The visit will last 1 hour. There may be an attendant present in the room. This is what the rules allow. This is enough. The morning passes in the usual shape. Bell, wash, porridge, laundry. But today the motions of it are different. Your hands wring the sheets with the same automatic competence they've developed over the weeks. But your mind is elsewhere, running ahead to the afternoon. What to say? What not to say in front of the attendant, what Catherine will look like, whether she'll be frightened walking into a place like this, whether she'll be able to keep her expression right. Catherine has never been good at keeping her expression right. Ruth works beside you at the vat. Visiting day, she asks. She always knows. My sister, Ruth nods, stirs the linens. Tell her everything you told me about Hargreaves's letter, about the solicitor question. Give her the specific language, the Lunacy Act, the Commission inquiry. I know. Don't cry in front of the attendant. I know. And eat the dinner properly. They watch on visiting days, want to show good progress. You look at her. You think of everything. 3 years, she says. The word that means everything here. The reception room, 2 chairs, a table between them, small, with a vase of dried flowers on it. The only decorative object you've seen in the entire institution, and you note it immediately, this single, slightly desperate aesthetic gesture. This arrangement of brown stalks in a china vase on a table, in a room where people come to see their locked away relatives. You're in the room for 4 minutes before Catherine arrives. She comes in with a whoosh of cold air from the corridor, coat still buttoned, her face, yes, just as you thought, just as you should have expected, her face showing everything. She's 27, 2 years younger than you. She has your mother's eyes and your father's stubbornness, and she's looking at you right now with an expression that is trying to be composed and not managing it at all. She sits down in the chair across from you. The attendant, a woman you don't know, takes her position at the side of the room, neither looking directly at you nor pretending not to hear. "Eleanor," Catherine says. Her voice is steady. She's pulled something together in the last 3 seconds that she didn't have when she walked in. "You look." "I look thinner," you say, because you might as well. "I know." "You look well," she says, which is not true but is perhaps the most useful available response. A pause. The dried flowers between you. The attendant at the side. You speak carefully and as clearly as you can, and with the specific composed manner that you've been practicing in your head for the days between Hargreaves's news and now. You tell her about the discharge inquiry. You tell her about the lunacy commission letter she's apparently already sent. You tell her about Arthur and about the admitting physician and about the 3-day observation period and what Hargreaves said about it and the specific phrase considerable and perhaps excessive insight and what that means. Catherine listens. She has a small leather notebook in her lap. She arrived prepared, you note, with a surge of love for her so sharp it's almost physical. And she writes things down. The name of the solicitor she's consulted, the section of the Act that governs discharge procedures, the question of who constitutes legal next of kin when the husband is deceased, and whether the brother-in-law has the standing to block discharge when the superintendent recommends it. Does Hargreaves think he has standing, you ask? The solicitor says it's unclear, Catherine says. Arthur is not your guardian. He was executor of Thomas's estate, but that doesn't give him guardianship over you. The question is whether the original admission paperwork named him as responsible relative. He signed something on admission. I wasn't conscious for it. I mean, you stop. I wasn't present, I didn't read it. I know. Catherine reaches across the table and takes your hand. The attendant notes this, but says nothing. The solicitor is requesting a copy of the admissions register. If Arthur exceeded his legal authority in signing as responsible relative, the admission itself may be contestable. May be, not is. The difference between those two words is where you've been living for 44 days. How long, you ask? Catherine's expression does something small and controlled. He says 4 to 6 weeks for the commission to review if Hargreaves submits his assessment formally. 4 to 6 weeks, 42 more mornings, the bell at 6, the grey dress, the laundry, the porridge, the flat repetition of days that are the same day. You look at Catherine, who's trying very hard to look like she's not fighting something, and you think about Ruth saying 3 years in the same tone you'd say it was raining, and you think about the woman from Somerset looking at cut short grass, and you think about Mary. Whatever happened to Mary, you haven't seen her since that afternoon in the corridor. All right, you say. Catherine squeezes your hand. I'm not leaving, she says. Until they let you out, I'm not leaving. I'm in a guest house in Southgate. I'll be there every Saturday. You nod. Tell me about home, you say. Tell me something ordinary. And she does. She tells you about the bakery on the corner that changed hands last winter and now makes excellent bread but terrible pastry, reversing the previous proprietor's strengths exactly. She tells you about the neighbour's dog who has become convinced that the postman is responsible for all the world's wrongs. She tells you that there are snowdrops in the garden. Early this year, Mrs. Parry next door says it means a warm spring. You sit in the reception room with the dried flowers and the attendant and the institutional smell, and you listen to your sister tell you about snowdrops. And you hold on to her voice the way you hold on to the number of the day. 44. and counting. What happens over the following weeks is not dramatic. This is the thing that surprises people when they hear stories like yours. They expect a villain, Arthur showing up red-faced and obstructive, Mrs. Briggs suddenly cruel, a crisis, a confrontation, a moment of clear injustice that can be pointed to and resolved. Good stories have these things. Real situations rarely arrange themselves so conveniently. What happens is correspondence. Dr. Hargreaves writes to the Lunacy Commission. The Lunacy Commission writes back. The Commission writes to the admitting physician. Dr. Welland writes a careful and self-protective letter that manages to convey both that he acted in good faith and that the information he was given was perhaps not comprehensively accurate. The Commission writes to the magistrate's clerk. The clerk writes to the magistrate. The magistrate writes something that, per Catherine's solicitor, is the institutional equivalent of shrugging while maintaining dignity. Arthur writes to the Commission. Arthur's letter is the obstacle you expected. He writes that Mrs. Eleanor Marsh came to his household in a state of profound mental disturbance following the death of his brother, that she made serious and unfounded accusations against him of financial misconduct, that she refused food and refused to leave the house and endangered her own health, and that he acted as any responsible person would act in placing her under the care of qualified medical professionals. The Commission writes back asking for the specific grounds of his claim to be responsible, relative for the purposes of the original admission. There is a silence of 2 weeks from Arthur. During these 2 weeks you do the laundry on Mondays and Tuesdays, you eat the porridge, you walk the airing court at exercise time, you count the flagstones, you see Catherine on Saturdays, and each Saturday she tells you what the solicitor has said, and you tell her how you are in the specific careful language that both of you have learned is the right language for this particular context. You do not sing. You do not cry in front of the attendants. You swallow glass every single morning, as Ruth instructed, and you go back to your station. In your 9th week, a thing happens in the airing court that you will think about for years. You're on your 3rd circuit. 62 steps along the north wall, the gravel crunching, the March sky finally beginning to soften towards something that might become spring when you hear it. A bird. A single bird somewhere beyond the east wall, invisible, producing a sound that is so entirely out of context with the institution that for a second you stop walking and look around, confused, as if the sound must have come from somewhere else. A blackbird, singing, not warning, not alarm. The spring song, the long, liquid, unhurried kind that a blackbird produces when it has decided that the season has arrived and it would like the neighbourhood to know. A song that is by any measure an extravagance, complicated, inventive, slightly showing off. You stand still and listen. Agnes is at her bench, face tipped up. But she is tipped toward the sound now, not the sky. The woman from Somerset, you've learned her name is Dorothea, she's been here 8 months, has stopped near the centre of the grass and is perfectly still. The blackbird sings, inside Colney Hatch this morning. One attendant is writing in the daybook, and another is sorting linen for the laundry in the kitchen. Staff are preparing the dinner that will be mutton again probably, and somewhere in the administrative wing there are letters to be written and ledgers to be updated, and a system that has been running since 1851 is running still, the same as yesterday. Outside the east wall, a blackbird is doing something entirely outside the system's comprehension. You listen until it stops. Then you finish your circuit. Arthur's silence is resolved in the 6th day of the 10th week. His solicitor writes to the Commission confirming that Mr. Arthur Marsh acknowledges that his designation as responsible relative in the original admissions documentation was made in his capacity as executor of the estate of the deceased Mr. Thomas Marsh, and that this capacity does not, under Section 12 of the Lunacy Act, constitute guardianship of the person, and that consequently Mr. Arthur Marsh does not hold the legal standing to object to discharge proceedings initiated by the medical superintendent. Catherine tells you this on Saturday. You read the letter twice, sitting in the reception room with the dried flowers, the words going through you in a way that is almost too much, a hot, vertiginous feeling, the ground shifting under something that has been fixed and weighted and immovable for 11 weeks. How long now, you ask? The Commission requires a 14-day notice period after the superintendent's formal recommendation, Catherine says. Hargreaves can sign it Monday. That means she's calculated this already, you can tell. The 12th of May, at the latest. Possibly the 10th. 11 weeks and 2 days have passed since your admission. The 12th of May is 24 days away. 24 days. You have been counting since day one. You have been counting because the number is the evidence that time is passing, that the days are distinguishable from each other, that you're still a person who exists in sequence rather than just a file on a shelf. 24 more. Catherine is watching you. Eleanor, she says. I'm fine, you say. I know. A pause. Tell me about the snowdrops, you say. The last 2 weeks pass differently. This is the unexpected thing. You thought they would be the hardest 2 weeks. So close, the exit visible, the waiting almost worse than the not knowing. And in a way, they are harder. But they are also, for the first time, textured in a way the previous weeks haven't been. Each day is not the same day anymore. Each day is a day you can count towards something rather than just away from something else. You learn the texture of the institution in a different way, knowing you're leaving. The smell, which you stopped noticing around week 4, becomes noticeable again. Not in a way that distresses you, in a way that lets you file it, the way you'd file a specific experience that belongs to a specific time. This smell, this cold, this rough wool, this, now, here, finite. You notice the other women differently, not with the careful, protective distance you've maintained, the distance that lets you see them as companions without seeing them as mirrors, as people without letting their situations merge into yours. Now you see them more directly. Agnes still on her bench every morning, tipping her face to the sky. You've never asked. You finally ask. I watch for the light to change, she says. It's a grey morning. The light hasn't changed yet. Some mornings there's a moment where it comes through different, warmer. And I always feel that I'll be allowed to leave on a morning like that. Has it happened, you ask? No, but it might. You sit beside her on the bench. Agnes, you say, do you have family? A daughter, she says, in Nottingham. Does she know you're here? Agnes is quiet for a moment. The grey light is steady and unvarying above the walls. She knows, Agnes says. She put me here. This is a silence into which there is nothing useful to say. You sit beside her until the bell rings and it's time to go back inside. Ruth, on the last Monday before your discharge date, teaches you the best way to wring a heavy sheet. A different grip, starting with the wrist positioned lower, reducing the strain on the forearm. She shows you without being asked, in the middle of the laundry session, with the same matter-of-fact practicality she shows everything. You won't need it, you say. Household laundry, she says. It's not different. A pause. You'll do laundry when you leave. Yes, you say. Well then. She shows you the grip again. You practice it. The sheet moves differently, easier. Ruth, you start. Don't, she says, not unkindly. Go, just go. You go back to your station. You ring the sheet with a new grip. The water runs out in streams onto the stone floor. The 10th of May, 1853, 69 days after admission, the sky that morning is actually blue, not trying to be, not on its way to being, actually blue, the particular spring blue that you had forgotten existed in a sky that has been white or grey or white-grey for the entire duration of your stay. A blue that makes the whitewashed walls of the airing court look like something from a painting, almost garish. The bell rings at 6. You wash your face in the cold brown water. You eat the porridge. But today Mrs. Briggs brings you a bundle before breakfast. Your clothes, your actual clothes, folded and pressed and slightly creased from the storeroom, but yours. The navy wool walking dress, the white blouse, the blue wool coat that Thomas gave you for your birthday 2 years ago, which has his taste written through it in the cut of the lapels and the quality of the buttons, and the fact that he bought it slightly too large because he said he wanted you to be comfortable in it, which you were. You are. You press your face into the shoulder for just a moment before you pull yourself back. You change in the dormitory while the other women dress for the day. Agnes is watching you from her bed, not sadly, with something that is not quite a smile but exists in the same vicinity. That colour suits you, she says. Thank you, Agnes. You fold the grey wool dress and set it on the bed, neatly. Someone else will wear it. Someone who will arrive probably soon, probably this week, and find a straw mattress and a cold dormitory and a room full of women who are or are not what the forms say they are, and the grey dress will be there for her in the storeroom. You go to breakfast. The discharge takes 2 hours. Forms, signatures. A final interview with Dr. Hargreaves, which is the shortest interview you've had with him in 11 weeks, during which he says, Mrs. Marsh, I believe your admission here was not ultimately medically necessary. I'm sorry it took as long as it did to arrive at this point. You look at him. This is the closest thing to an apology the institution will produce. It is partial. It is qualified. It addresses the length of stay rather than the fact of it, and it does not address the admitting physician, or the magistrate, or Arthur, or the lunacy act, or the bed you shared, or the porridge, or Mary, and what happened in the dormitory that afternoon, or the 14 weeks of the washing, and the same stone corridor, and the same bell, the same bell, the same bell. Thank you for writing to the commission, you say. He nods. Take care of yourself, he says, and this, coming from him, is more than it sounds. The front door of Colney Hatch opens and you walk through it. Catherine is in the carriage on the gravel drive. The carriage door is open before you've reached the bottom of the steps, and she is out of it before you've covered the distance, and you're in each other's arms on the gravel drive with the blossoms falling, and the blue sky, and the enormous, ridiculous, beautiful facade of the institution behind you, and you don't care about any of it. The falling blossoms and the gravel under your feet and the cold air and the sound of the carriage horse, and Catherine saying your name over and over. Eleanor! 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 I'm here! I know! I'm here! The smell of the outside air. Just the outside air. The carriage takes you toward London, toward the station, toward the north. You sit with Catherine's hand in yours and you watch England through the carriage window, the fields and the hedges and the particular Hertfordshire spring, everything green in that early excessive way, before the heat has tempered it, before the summer has committed it to its final version. The green, the genuine, uncurated, untrimmed green of grass that's been allowed to grow to the height it wants to grow to. You watch it for a long time. What will you do? Catherine asks. You consider this. I'm going to stand at Thomas's grave, you say. First, yes. And then I'm going to grieve properly for however long it takes. Yes. And then a pause. The fields moving past. A farmhouse. A line of washing. A child running in a garden. All of it so ordinary it is almost unbearable. Then I'm going to decide what comes next. Catherine squeezes your hand. There are things that happened in there that I need to tell someone, you say. About how it works. About who ends up in a place like that and why. Who will you tell? You look out the window. I don't know yet, but someone should know. A pause. Several someones. The hedges move past. A blackbird rises from a fence post as the carriage approaches, wheeling into the sky in a clean direct line. Unfenced. She did, as it happens. Eleanor Marsh is not a name that appears in the historical record I can point you to. She is a composite, in the way that many of the people in these stories are, built from the documented case studies, the admissions registers, the survivor accounts that do exist in various forms, the records of the Lunacy Commission inquiries of the 1840s and 50s, the research of historians like Andrew Scull and Anne Digby, who have spent decades excavating what it was actually like inside these places, the testimonies of women who found ways to write about it afterward, some published, some not. But the experience is real. The grey wool dress and the laundry and the counted days are real. The Lunacy Act of 1845 is real. Colney Hatch is real. It opened in 1851. It was the largest asylum in England. It did house over 1,000 patients. It did use the principles of moral management. And it was also, like all institutions of its type and era, a place where the gap between the stated philosophy and the lived experience was significant and in some cases devastating. The categories of admission are real. Excessive grief, refusal of food, social withdrawal. These appear in the admissions registers. Women were committed for these things by husbands and fathers and brothers-in-law because the law allowed it, because the social structures of the period made it possible, and because the medical understanding of mental health in the 1850s had the genuine, well-intentioned framework of moral management, sitting alongside a practice of institutional power that those intentions didn't always override. The strong room is real, the counted cutlery is real. The visits of the Lunacy Commission inspectors, who found the ventilation admirable, are real. Ruth, who has been in there 3 years, and knows the grip for the heavy sheets, and tells you not to thank her. Ruth is real in the way that all people who have been in such places and developed the particular efficient wisdom of survival are real. The blackbird is real. Spring always comes. You are warm now, not the institutional warmth of the laundry room, all steam and effort and 12-minute hot baths timed by an attendant. The real warmth. The warmth of a body that is not cold, in a place that is not counting you. Whatever day it is where you are, whatever the hour, whether it's 10 past midnight and you've been awake too long, or 4 in the morning when the mind does its strange lonely work, or a Sunday afternoon when sleep arrived unexpectedly like a kind visitor. Wherever you are, you're not in a place with a bell at 6. You're not a number in a register. You're not under observation. Outside, somewhere, a bird might be singing. Spring has been arriving and arriving for centuries, the same inexhaustible arrival, the same blackbird on the same fence post with the same extravagant song, the same green in the hedges, the same blue in the sky when it finally comes. Eleanor stood at a barred window and watched it through glass. You don't have to. The church bells are fading. The laundry and the stone corridor and the bell at 6 are receding, the way all difficult things eventually recede when you are warm and safe and the room around you is quiet. The grey dress on the bed, the straw mattress, Agnes, looking at the sky. All of it further now, softer. The way sleep takes things that were sharp and makes them round. The way the body knows, when it is finally allowed to rest, how to let go. You've been warm enough tonight, fed enough, safe enough. You have a roof and the dark and the particular permission of late hours to stop thinking and start dreaming. That's enough. That's everything. Somewhere a blackbird. Somewhere spring. The same as it was for Eleanor. The same as it was for all of them. Some things don't change. The need for rest at the end of a long day, the way sleep reaches up. Let it come. Let it come now. Let the sound quiet. Let the thoughts soften and slow and finally drift. Good night.